Hello, everyone, and welcome this afternoon. This afternoon, I have Gillian Roddie with us, and she is going to tease out the subject of making your mindset work for you. So Gillian's going to talk to us. Please put your questions in the Q&A, and we'll have a discussion afterwards. So Gillian, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emer, and hi, everybody. I'm so delighted to be here. I see our attendees are trickling in. So I'm going to start sharing my screen here and I'll just keep an eye on what everybody's doing. So bear with me there. I'm just going to, okay. Folks, you are also very welcome here this afternoon. I'm delighted to be here having a chat to you. Before we get started, I'd like you to think of something that you cannot do. Think of something you can't do right now. And just say that to yourself. I can't or I cannot. Think of something you cannot do and say, I can't. You got it? Okay. Now, I want you to say it to yourself again. Only this time, I want you to add the word yet to the end of that sentence. Okay. What's the difference? How different do they feel? I'm going to stop sharing for a moment so that I can bring my chat box up. How do those two statements feel different to you? Saying I can't or I can't yet? Or do they feel any different at all? Don't be shy, use the chat box. Go on ahead. Can't is limiting and pessimistic, absolutely. Anyone else? How does it feel? Does it feel different? Does it feel the same when you add the word yet onto the end of an I cannot statement? Exactly, Nicola. Yes means that there is a possibility of doing it. So both of those statements, Alex's statement about it being limiting and Nicola's statement about there being a positive possibility. That's the power of yet. And that's essentially what we're going to be talking about today, is the difference between limiting or definitive statements like I can't do something, which is what we also call slightly fixed mindset, and I cannot do something yet, which is a much more open-ended statement, and that's a growth mindset. So I'm going to go back into my screen share. Bear with me there for a moment. Okay. Great. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to have a read through these different mindset statements. Grab yourself a pen or a piece of paper, and I just want you to write down, have a read through those. So if you're wondering what kind of mindset you have, this will help to give you a bit of an insight into which way your mindset leans. And I have to say this from the outset, and I'll say it repeatedly. We are not talking about better or worse mindsets. We're just talking about different types of mindsets, and there's a place for both. We'll talk about that in a little while. Have a read through those and jot down which of those statements you agree with, which ones resonate with you, which ones relate to you, which ones do you read and you go, yeah, I'm like that. Just have a read through those, give you a couple of seconds there. This is meant to be a passive exercise, isn't it? You're meant to be able to sit there and listen. And here I am coming along on a Wednesday afternoon asking you to do stuff. Just have a read through those and see which ones you agree with. Again, cannot emphasize it enough. We are not saying that one is right or one is wrong, different types of mindset. Okay. So I'm going to go on to the next slide now, but the statements will still stay there. Each one of these are either a fixed type of mindset descriptor or a growth type of mindset descriptor. So if you found yourself agreeing with the orange statements, those would lean more towards a fixed mindset, whereas those that are highlighted in green, those are more of a growth mindset. So we're going to explore what those two things mean, having a fixed versus a growth mindset. But in essence, it is what we were talking about there at the very beginning. This, as Alex said, the fixed mindset is a little bit more limiting. It's a bit more definitive. Whereas the growth mindset is the addition of that yet. It's open, it's opening up a possibility to the end of it. So when we talk about mindsets, we absolutely have to mention Carol Dweck, who was the researcher in Stanford who really originated this idea. And the sort of the background research behind all of this was initially done with high school children. So Carol Dweck and her associates did some experiments in the 1980s. And essentially what they did was they took two groups of school students and they gave both groups tests, small examinations, challenging tests. Now, the type of stuff that really made them think. At the end of the test, one of the groups was praised for their intelligence. You're so clever, well done. You're obviously really, really intelligent. This is great work. You're so clever, so smart. The other group was praised for the effort that they put in. Wow, you must have worked really hard. I can see how much effort you've put into this. Tell me more about what you did for this. So there, at the end of, they then subsequently retested those kids. And what they found was that the group that was praised on effort scored higher versus the group that were told that they were smart. And therein was the sort of the conception of this idea of different types of mindsets, the fixed versus the growth mindset. And what the two mindsets describe, the fixed mindset being that slightly more limited one, is that fixed mindset is where you have a belief that your intelligence, your personality, your character is inherent and it is static. So, if I was to ask people, are you any good at maths? People with a fixed mindset would perhaps say, no, I'm absolutely dreadful at maths, no good at it, absolutely hate it, don't like it at all. It's a fixed mindset. Now, obviously, there's a bit more mixed up in there, but essentially, if you think that you are bad at maths, that's it, that's the end of the story. Then you have a fixed mindset approach. On the other hand, if you have a growth mindset, you believe that your intelligence, your personality, your character, that those are all things that can be developed. There is room for growth inside that. So a growth mindset is a tendency to approach learning, to be slightly more comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty, because you might see opportunity inherent within that. Not afraid to fail. So anyone who was at the last talk that I did, the one a couple of weeks ago on failing forward, a fixed mindset around failing is that it's about describing yourself. I am a failure. People with the fixed mindset approach to failure are really very scared of failure because they feel that it's a very defining characteristic. Whereas having a growth mindset approach to failure, it's that you're failing. It's a transient state as opposed to a very fixed one. So, and again, I'm going to say it again and again and again, there are no right or wrong mindsets here. We're talking about different types of mindsets. And it's also important to say that a fixed mindset can be very, very appropriate in certain conditions. So a fixed mindset is a very decisive mindset that if there's situations that require very definitive decision making, having a more fixed approach to it can be very good. And you can also switch between mindsets. So all of those different, all of the mindset statements that we had a few slides ago, if you find yourself agreeing with some and not others, or you're kind of half and half, maybe some mix, or some fixed and some growth, that's entirely fine as well. So you can adopt a mindset depending on what the situation demands of you. So I'm just going to stop there for 2 seconds and just see, is there any questions or any queries that anybody wants to raise at this point? I'm always a fan of just stopping and pausing and just seeing, is there anything that anybody wants to bring to the table? Maybe I'll sing, or don't worry, I'm not going to sing. I'm not going to inflict that type of pain on anybody. Nope. Okay, great. So we'll go back to our screen sharing. So yeah, no right or wrong mindsets. But if you find, like, if there's something in the back of your head that's saying to you that you really want to try something new, but you're afraid to, or you know that you need to pivot and do something different, but it's really worrying you, you're scared of doing it. This is the type of mindset that we really want to help you to begin adopting, is that growth mindset. Because having a growth mindset is about saying, I know that this is going to be challenging, but I'm not going to let that stop me from doing it. So this is where, so unlike all of you brilliant people who are incredibly creative, I come from a science background. And for a very long time, I told myself that as a scientist, I was not a creative person. And I've come to realize that actually I'm creative, just in a slightly different way. And one of the things that I like to do is bring science to the table to help me to understand creativity and creative processes and the thinking process behind, what being creative means. Because in essence, just here's a curious question. Can anybody define creativity for me? What is creativity? There's a question for you. Can you define what creativity is? And this is where it's just, crickets chirping, hearing nothing. Can anybody define creativity? Give it another couple of seconds. So, oh, I love that, juggling soul work. I love it. DCCI clients love it. Problem solving and self-expression, not keeping to norms. Love it. Love it. It's hard, isn't it? It's hard to define what creativity is. We all know, we know it, we do it, but how do you define what it is? Expanding, I love it, Catherine. In academic terms, creativity, it depends on who you're speaking to from an academic point of view, as in who defines what creativity is. But one of my favorite definitions of it is a beautifully simple and elegant one. And I'm going to put it into the chat box here. Creativity is a new idea that brings value. And I love that definition because it is so all-encompassing of all of the different types of work that we do with a creative slant. And so, don't worry, I am going to segue into the slide. One of the reasons why I find it important to be able to define these things, because it helps me to parse all of the information together. And creativity is the act of creating new ideas that bring value. Being creative, being somebody who creates ideas or who makes ideas, generates ideas that bring value, in doing that, you are adopting a growth mindset because you are progressing, you are moving forward, you are going into an unknown, you are facing into an uncertainty and creating some sort of a solution to it. Now, that can be, if you're thinking to yourself, but I'm an artist or I'm a ceramicist, how does that tie in? But you are still making something new that creates value. Now, it might be value in the form of feelings, or it might be value in the form of emotion, or it might be value in the form of something instinctual, but it's still value. And the way that we're able to do this as adults is because of something that we call neuroplasticity. So does anybody else, hear this? If you were, like, when you were growing up, were you ever told, if you smacked your brother on the head, he was going to lose about 10,000 brain cells, or so you wished? Or if you headed a ball, that you were going to lose X number of brain cells? Or if you had too much to drink, that you would lose so many numbers of brain cells? And that was a very, very pervasive idea for a very long time. In fact, it was only in the 1990s that we realized that actually the brain doesn't lose cells all the time. We don't lose brain cells. We manage to keep pretty much the same, if not slightly more, numbers of brain cells. It's just that over time, sometimes they can shrink a little bit. But what we can do is we can create lots of new connections, and that's where the growth happens. And that's what this idea on the slide is. Neuroplasticity is the act or is the art of creating new neuronal connections in your brain, making new pathways as you learn. So the very act of even just sitting here, if you're listening to me and you're feeling a little bit of inspiration, you're feeling a bit of aha, you're creating your new, sorry, it's such a tongue twister, new neuronal pathways by learning. So learning doesn't always mean formal reading a book type of learning. It can also mean learning a new skill, or being in a new job, or stepping outside your comfort zone. So adult learning theory tells us that a readiness to learn, a willingness to learn, wanting to learn, that motivation, and learning through experience, i.e. the act of make mistakes and trying again, are key to be able to learn as an adult. So that's our growth mindset. Your growth mindset is how adult learn is how it's facilitated. But neuroplasticity is the biological mechanism through which it works. So if in the back of your head you're thinking, I'm far too old to learn anything new, absolute nonsense. Your brain can make new neural pathways throughout life. And it also helps to promote longevity and well-being as you get older. So a growth mindset is a good thing, for multiple different reasons. Now, I want to tell you about, as a demonstration of neuroplasticity, I love this. To become a black cab driver in London, you need to study for 2 to 4 years. You need to learn off 25,000 different roads. Some of them are dead ends. Some of them are, they're tiny. They don't even look like roads. They have to learn off about 20,000 different landmarks within a 25-mile radius of Charing Cross in London. And at the end of their training, cabbies take a test, and it's so elegantly named the knowledge. That's what the test is called. At the end of their training, they have to take the knowledge. And it takes on average 12 attempts before a cabbie qualifies and passes the test. So the knowledge is widely considered one of the most challenging tests in the world that somebody can do. Absolutely phenomenal stuff. And in the early 2000s, scientists did some work with black cabbies, and they found that the region of the brain that's responsible for learning, it's called the hippocampus. It's responsible for learning, memory, and cognition. The hippocampus got bigger as they progressed through their training. Now, really interestingly, black cabbie hippocampal regions are bigger than London bus driver hippocampal regions. The theory is that bus drivers, although they still have a very complex job to do, they still go on defined routes. So a bus driver will take trips down a defined route, whereas every time you sit into a black cab, the cabbie has to figure out how to get from point A, where you are, to point B, where you want to go, using a variety of different turns and loops. So it's an incredible, and those findings have been reinforced a number of times. So what it shows us is that the act of learning as an adult through growth mindset approaches, facilitates neuroplasticity, the development of our brain, and literally makes our brains grow bigger. So I love that story, because if black cabbies can do it, there's hope for us all. So how do you do that? How do we do it? Now, maybe I've inspired somebody to become a black cabbie. I hope I have. Please, let me know if you do. But if not, how do we adopt that growth mindset on a day-to-day basis? Especially at the moment when we are coming out, we're starting to come out of this huge period of flux, but also there's massive uncertainty. We're only beginning to pick ourselves up after the last year and dust ourselves off. So how do we move forward with a growth mindset? So the first thing is that you pause and you stop and you learn to hear your fixed mindset voice. Now, you might be familiar with the phrase of listening to your inner saboteur, What is the voice inside you that tells you, you can't do this? You're not clever enough to do this. You can't do it. That's way beyond what you're able to do. Learn to hear that voice. We all have an inner saboteur. We all do. And sometimes our inner saboteur can be protective. It can stop us from going into some crazy wild ideas that, are destined to fail. Other times, our inner saboteur is kind of just being a bit of a, well, you can insert the bad French word there. So try to remember the last time you struggled with something, and try and remember what the voice inside your head was telling you. How were you talking to yourself about that? Was it a fixed mindset? Were you telling yourself, you can't do this, you're not clever enough, you're not intelligent enough, you're not friendly enough, you can't network like that? What was the voice saying to you? And how much power are you giving to that inner voice that you have? How powerful is your inner saboteur? You can then remind yourself that you still have a choice. You can choose to listen to the saboteur, or you can choose to talk back to it. We'll talk about talking back to it now in a second. But you can also choose, and it is a choice, to see challenges and setbacks and criticisms as a sign that that talent that you have is fixed. So, what are you talking about? You're an artist. You can't do such and such, or that's beyond what your skill set is. So you can choose whether or not to take that on board. What we don't want, though, is toxic positivity. Does anybody know what I mean by toxic positivity? Just keeping an eye on my chat box in case anybody knows what I mean by when we say toxic positivity. Come on, Maria, give us more than that. What do I mean by toxic positivity? Toxic positivity is that, oh, you'll be fine, you'll be grand. Yeah, grand, everything's going to be fine. Being fake positive, exactly. So, we're not saying is go ahead and just throw yourself forward regardless of what's happening. That's toxic positivity. When you go and you something really crap has happened, and you go to somebody, have a cup of tea, and you go, God, I'm really having just such a rough time at the moment. And they turn around to you and they say, you'll be fine, everything's going to be absolutely fine. That's toxic positivity. So we just need to be careful of that as well. So listen to your voice, recognize that you have a choice in how you approach these things. Talk back to it with a growth mindset voice. There is, yes, Lisa, yes, 50% of Instagram posts are very positive. You're absolutely right. If you want an introduction to the power of yes, I cannot recommend enough Sesame Street. And in particular, the Janelle Monáe version of The Power of Yes. It is an absolutely wonderful, wonderful video. In fact, Sesame Street is it's a bit of a playbook for, how to approach life with some really, really good messages. But even something simple like that, using the word yes, try and catch yourself the next time you hear you say, oh no, I can't do that. I can't do that yet. It's different. It hits very, very differently. So you can talk back to that fixed mindset voice the next time you tell yourself, oh, I'm not clever enough to do that. I'm not clever enough to do that yet. The very act of you being here, being at these webinars, you have already adopted a growth mindset. You are pushing yourself forward to learn new things and to become more adaptive of challenging situations. And then you can take action. So I love these phrases. We do a lot of work. So I work in third level with entrepreneurs and with intrapreneurs and innovators and creators. And so we do a lot of work around mindsets, because when you're starting, as many of you will know, when you're starting out with a new venture, you have to get used to making mistakes and failing. You have to get really comfortable with that really, really quickly, because it's an inevitable part of the journey. And what we also know, like we said earlier, from adult learning theory, is that actually we learn best when we make mistakes. That's how we learn. We get it wrong and then we get it right. So I love these phrases because these are really simple, straightforward, but very effective and powerful reflection questions. So if you find yourself in a situation where it's challenging, you're moving outside your comfort zone and you proceed, you can use these as prompts to develop your growth mindset. I'm still wondering, what are the pieces of the puzzle that you're missing still? What do you still need to know? What do you need to find out in order to complete the information that you're seeking? What do you understand now? So that's kind of that's a two-parter. That's both celebrating your success, what have you learned, and what is it that you have acquired, but also what can you say, what are the pieces that you have certainty about, and it can help you identify the pieces that are missing. I can apply what I did learn to a confusing part of the process was, etc. I think I'll understand it better. So you can see that these are all very simple but very powerful prompts to really get you thinking about how you think. It's a very fancy word. We call that metacognition. So these kind of metacognitive approaches are really taking time, spending the time to think about how it is that you're approaching these situations will really help you to develop a growth mindset as a habit. Because what you find is that the more you do this, just like when you're practicing your craft, when you're practicing your art, when you're developing your skills, thinking and growth mindset thinking is also a habit, that it's a skill that you can learn. It might feel a little bit uncomfortable initially, but the more you get into the habit of it, the more you will find yourself naturally asking yourself, okay, that was great, but what are the pieces that I'm still missing? What have I not considered here? How can I do better at that? I think I need a little bit more in this part. The people who you see around you who just seem to be able to just keep developing and just keep growing, the chances are they have developed or naturally have a growth mindset. So pay attention to them as well. What's their attitude like? And so before, we'll have a quick chat now in a second, but these are some really nice examples of how fixed and growth mindsets would approach similar situations. So in terms of addressing challenges, a fixed mindset, a challenge would be something to be avoided to maintain the appearance of intelligence. So, a fixed mindset was that, nope, not going near that. People see me as quite the star in this area, and I am not going to change that. And again, there are situations where that is arguably an appropriate way to go about it. Whereas with a growth mindset, challenges are something to be embraced, stemming from a desire to learn. So I'll just give you a second to look, because I think there's some really nice ideas in there. Those last two in particular are something, working in third level, and especially with adult learners, criticism, getting feedback. Feedback is something that we can be very, very sensitive about, because we can take it as a personal affront sometimes. There's a great example of talking back to your fixed mindset. Let's say you get feedback about something and you find yourself getting really bristly about it. Oh, it must mean that it's crap, I can't do this. That's your fixed mindset speaking to you. And you can talk back to that and say, okay, well, I didn't get it right this time, but there's an opportunity to learn from this and go forward and try it differently the next time around. So I would now like to offer you, this will close out this before we have a chat. If you think that you would like to practice your growth mindset, these are 10 prompts that we use quite frequently. And what I would like to offer you is take a read through those different mindset statements and see, is there one of them that resonates with you? Is there one that you think, oh, yeah, I think I'd like to give that a try? So I'll just let you have a read through those there for a minute. And now I'd like to invite, is there anybody who would like to ask any questions about anything that we've discussed? Or even better, is there anybody who would like to share an experience that they've had? Perhaps there's one of these mindset practice statements that you feel really resonates, or is there, have you had an experience of using your mindset to approach something differently? Do I need to sing again, Emer?
No, I mean, it's not really my gig, but can I ask you something?
Of course.
You see on number 6,
Yes.
yeah?
Yes.
Doesn't one, first of all, have to value and respect the quarter from which the feedback and criticism is coming?
That's a really, really interesting question. Tell me about what's behind that. Tell me about, pull that apart a little bit. Why are you asking that question? Tell me more.
Okay, by pulling that apart, the thing I would feel that one has to respect the quarter from where feedback and criticism is coming, that the longer I go on in adult life, I think sometimes it's used as a mechanism by people to undermine the confidence and the creativity of, say, a maker whose work might be stronger, a weight maker whose profile might be better, a person whose work is better. And I don't mean to be cynical, but I do think it's an important point.
I think it's a really, really interesting one. And I think that there is absolutely validity in what you're suggesting, for sure. But I'd also push back on it and say that is it possible that could potentially, like, even see the words that you're using, that we should, we only take feedback from the quarters that we respect. There is the potential within that to then create something of an echo chamber, that we can get feedback from all sorts of places, and we do get to decide which feedback we listen to. But if we're only listening to the feedback that we respect, and perhaps from the people who we super duper trust, are we running the risk then of alienating an audience who we might not agree with, or we might not particularly like, or there would be a very subjective decision to be made within that. Let's say, for example, we were talking about, let's say if I was running a brand new class, and I was to only get feedback from the students and the staff who, I knew they knew what they were talking about. If I didn't listen, let's say there were people who hadn't showed up and they just completely took the piss all the time, and I just went absolute nonsense, and they provided me with feedback, arguably I would want to actually pay a little bit more attention to the feedback that they're providing, because what was the reason behind the feedback? Why were they disengaged? Why was it that they didn't like what was happening? I would pay a little bit more attention to, or I'd explore that feedback or what was behind it. That are we creating just sort of that echo chamber of people who support what we do if we're only listening to certain types of people? I don't think there's a hard and fast answer to that. I think this, but I would be wary of cutting off the outliers. Okay. For the sake of them being outliers.
Right. I don't want to monopolize. I didn't quite. What I was coming at is say something like, say I really want to get my product into a certain shop.
Yes.
Right? I would be respectful of the people who are buyers for that shop.
Yes.
And maybe less likely to listen to the feedback on my work from a shop that I didn't believe was my market or I wasn't aspiring to. That's the kind of comment I was coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's for sure. I mean, in terms of understanding your market and understanding your customer, absolutely. But I would be very wary of discounting it altogether.
Yeah.
That there's what are you not seeing? Like, is there actually opportunity in the feedback that you hadn't considered? Are there hidden? And I think that's where what we talk about with the growth mindset, being comfortable in ambiguity. And there is always ambiguity in markets that are not, that they're not necessarily your home markets, that your comfort markets. What else is out there? Now, you might not be in a position to explore unknown markets, but I'd be kind of keeping them in the zone, but not in the center.
Okay, thank you. I'm stealing time from the audience here. If you want to, do you see the notes in the chat there?
Absolutely. Let's see. So I said yes to everything, jumped out of the comfort zone. It's connected me with all kinds of, but that's fantastic, Catherine. Love the Nick saying, I love the one saying you don't know what you don't know. Love asking questions and always encourage people to ask. Absolutely. Criticism and self-criticism feedback loop, have to consciously delineate between these two. Absolutely. Yeah. And I guarantee you there is nobody who is a harsher critic of you than yourself. There is nothing that anybody in the world can say to you that's worse than that sometimes the conversations that we have with ourselves. And but we don't pause and give ourselves the kindness that we deserve to sometimes. Alex, overcoming public speaking. Fantastic. It is. Public speaking is incredibly empowering. Well done, you. That's fantastic. Emer, these should be familiar to you. Emer this is Emer Ward Powell. I'm saying this to you in the chat box. Some of these should be very familiar to Emer. Should be familiar with them. Excellent. So yeah, so it's like a fixed and growth mindset. It really pertains to, when we're learning new things around us. And so I think we don't always appreciate how many learning opportunities we have surrounding us on a day-to-day basis. We're not always going to have the time and the energy to be able to take on that learning, but there is always learning opportunities around us. We're still, I think we still, as adults, we feel like our learning journey is often over after we finish up at second level or first or primary, or whenever our formal education system finished. But that's not the case at all. And yeah, finding those aha moments on an everyday basis is so much fun. Nicola said, I think actively seeking out new things in both professional and personal life is both scary and exciting. Absolutely, Nicola, especially at the moment. Scary and very exciting. Anyone have any other questions or anything they want to explore? Maria said number 5, number is choose learning well over learning fast. I wish we learned. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, absolutely, Maria. Yeah, there's learning well over learning fast. Is anybody who's after myself and Emer we're talking about the move that so many people had to make into e-commerce when COVID hit, and that was a learning experience that probably came at breakneck speed for most people and was very, very challenging. But that doesn't mean that you can't pause, and take a step back when it's able to, when you can make it happen. Okay. Excellent. Any other questions?
Yep. Say about, if you want to take this a bit further, about allowing our growth mindset, the e-commerce piece.
Yes.
I don't think our clients and all of us have to be constantly available. There's this demand to be constantly available, and I don't think that that's right.
No, goodness me, no, absolutely. So there's yes, that is something that moving into digital commerce has created a very different and challenging landscape around, essentially about the boundary maintenance. Any of us who've begun working from home, a lot of people are reporting difficulties in being able to maintain that segmentation between what is my home life and what is my work life. How many of us have had our dinner and then gone, oh crap, I forgot to send an email, and then popped back into the back to the computer to do something else. And that is something, if you have digital or an online business, you can very much have that feeling of because your business is on your phone, in your hand, you know, most hours of the day, or in your computer, it can be very, very challenging to extricate yourself from that world. But there's no, I think that that's a bigger, there's a big conversation that is going to need to be had more often about, you know, that's what's happened to any of the industries that have had to move online. What we haven't yet done is properly, adequately figure out, what does this new landscape look like? What does it feel like? You know, what are the new boundaries that we're supposed to be working around? You know, when we worked in the office, fingers crossed, most of us, you know, would not have contacted colleagues at 10 o'clock on a Sunday evening about routine business. But now all of a sudden, because our phones are in our hands so much, those barriers have been broken down. So there's, for anybody who's really struggling around that type of that online existence, first of all, I'd say it's not just you. It really isn't just you. I mean, I'm really finding it very, very challenging. But you absolutely have the right to have an analog existence in parallel to your digital existence. And that what you'll find is that if you're, you know, putting those barriers in place, it doesn't scare away customers. It doesn't threaten customers. What you're doing is putting the same safeguards in place that you would in a physical store, and that your valued customers, your return customers, they're going to respect that and understand that. So I think that there's, you know, there's all of those soft elements around digital enterprise that we still need to have. I don't think they're bare, you know, we've gotten better. There's more, a significant amount of information out there about the hard skills of e-commerce and about digital business. But I'd love to see more conversations happening around, well, how do you act, you know, around your digital business?
Yes, just before you answer Catherine's question, I was thinking of that in the context of, you know, you had this lovely phrase by creativity and its definition, that it's a new idea that brings value. And I think if craft and design enterprises are sort of pushed into even more than, you know, an office worker having to answer the odd email in the evening, are pushed into this constant, I must engage with social media, I must engage with e-commerce, that they're not going to have the idea, the time for their growth mindset and their creativity. That was my point.
So so there's, you know, your social media activity needs to be structured in the same way that any other element of your business needs to be structured, and it needs to have a strategy, and you need to have barriers and boundaries in place. And I would strongly recommend anybody who is getting traction on their social media and finds himself becoming, you know, a little bit overwhelmed by that new activity. There are a lot of excellent, you know, digital strategy consultants out there, or people, it's resources that you can avail of, about, you know, giving you the skills, giving you the framework to be able to strategically implement your social media. Just because you're online, it doesn't mean that you need to make yourself available all the time in any way, shape, or form. And likewise for social media, you know, don't forget that Instagram, and, you know, Instagram in particular, by virtue, Facebook as well, they are marketplaces. They are built to accommodate the customer, not to protect you as the seller. So you have to be able to protect yourself in that world. Otherwise, you know, you will get swamped very, very quickly. So yeah, definitely strategically implementing social media strategy or social media activity is an absolute must, no matter what size your business is.
And switch off and let your creativity overtake you rather than being a slave to it.
Oh, absolutely, completely. Yeah.
You have a lot of comments coming in here to see that.
Maybe useful to think about how much of a commodity we want to be or not. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. As a designer, you've no choice. Platforms is your place, your face. Emer, I understand where you're coming from, but I'd push back again. You do have a choice in that it's, yes, you're right. Platforms are your face. And I know that you are constantly up against it with algorithms that just seem to make absolutely no sense whatsoever. You know, one day you're flavor of the month and the next day you're getting absolutely no visibility whatsoever. But working with again,
Yeah.
social media it's a world of, like, it's a particular sector, and if you've never used it before, if any of us have never used it before, it's a whole new skill set. We don't think, if we want to learn maths, we think of nothing about going to a maths teacher. If we want to learn about, you know, if we want to learn a new skill, we think nothing of going to a skills mentor for that particular skill, to acquire that skill. Social media is no different. It is a particular skill set. There are reasons why, there is a reason why there is such a thing as a digital marketer. That's what their whole business is. So, you know, if you're finding yourself struggling, there's a lot of free resources out there, but there's also a number of, if you have a little dig around, especially with Instagram, there's quite a few really good smaller digital marketers, you know, and there's people out there who can help. If you're on social media morning, noon, and night, you will burn yourself out so quickly. And as Emer said, there'll be no room for creativity. You need space to be creative, to come up with those new ideas. You need space.
We do have the e-commerce bootcamp, and we have the support of digital marketing for our clients, which is brilliant. But I do know that people struggle, and they need to allow themselves that space to be creative and make that business decision.
Yeah. And the one thing I'd say about social media is that the speed that it operates is actually a real plus. Here's me putting my growth mindset hat on. So you can say, you know, it all happens so fast, everything has to be constant. But that also, think about it, it also gives you the opportunity to make repeated mistakes. And with the speed that it moves on, you can pick yourself back up and go again very, very quickly. So it's not, you know, that's what we mean about, you know, growth mindsets is kind of not being afraid to challenge the norm and be able to find the opportunity inherent within something. So let's say you try out a new social media strategy, and you say, again, anyone who was at my talk a couple of weeks ago, you'll be familiar, we talked about intelligent failure. So let's say you wanted to start a new social media strategy. You plan it out for 4 weeks, for example. You plan it out for 4 weeks, and you make sure that at the end of every week, you are checking your insights. You are paying close attention to your insights, understanding, you know, who are your customers, who are the viewers, you know, what's the turnover, who's being converted, et cetera, et cetera. At the end of those 4 weeks, you take stock, you figure out, is it working, is it not? If it's not working, no, you try something new and you start again. And, you know, in social media land, that's very, very little time at all. So you have the opportunity to keep making mistakes and keep learning from them. But the other great thing about using social media is, don't forget, every time you do something on social media, particularly if it's in terms of a permanent post or a grid post, you are showing up. You are still creating. You are still putting stuff out there. You are creating a whole bank of collateral that you can then come back to at a point. And, you know, we all know that feeling. 6 months down the line, you remember, oh my goodness, I did something similar. Or you're looking back through all of your posts and you go, oh, that didn't work then, but it's going to work now. Keep showing up. Keep doing the work. You know, even if it doesn't feel like, if it's not an aha moment on any given day, keep showing up. Keep doing it. And that's where having those boundaries and having those barriers in place to prevent you from getting overwhelmed become really important, because you just need to keep doing enough over and over and over again. Do your intelligent failure loops. Keep, you know, that's what strategy is. Strategy is about putting framework about it in the activity that you're doing. Sorry, I get very excited when I talk about that. My hands start going completely bananas. But you can see what I mean, it's all about kind of not being afraid to pivot and reframe and change and keep trying.
Yeah. Okay. That's answered that question for me.
I said, yeah, time management is really important, Alison. Absolutely. really, really important. I'm giving yourself the permission to say, there's a lovely phrase that we use in coaching as well. And I do love who was it who said something about saying yes to everything. And I do think that that's a really lovely way of going about things. But there is also the other way of looking at it is, and in terms of time management and becoming overwhelmed, when you say yes to everything, what are you saying no to? And that's also something very important to consider. No is just as important a word as yes when it comes to intelligent and strategic growth and being able to understand where your priorities are. So,
yes, that's given us an awful lot of food for thought. And what I'm taking away is that's lovely piece about, I actually think that, and I'd like to think that most of our clients are in a growth mindset position.
Yeah.
They wouldn't produce such wonderful work if they didn't. But
absolutely,
I really think they need to keep carving out that time for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. By inherent, if you're a creative person, you inherently have a growth mindset. You just might have to work a little bit on adapting it to different situations. That reframing piece. Exactly. Yeah.
So anyway, it's been a lovely session with you. I've learned a huge amount, and I think our audience enjoyed it as well, and everybody's engaged very well. So, I mean, I can't say much more than thank you everyone for joining us. And listen, Gillian, it's been a pleasure. I don't know, do you coach on the side? Do you provide motivational?
I do. Yeah. No, I do. Absolutely. No, it's been an absolute pleasure. And I've really, really enjoyed being here. And a huge thank you to everybody who's been at these sessions. But yes, I'm involved in innovation and creativity, learning, development, and coaching and mentoring. So yeah, it's, if anyone,
and we have a statement here. Someone says it's fabulous, feels like hanging out with your pals. That's brilliant. I really love that. Someone's joining us from Canada.
Amazing.
Welcome.
Amazing.
But I mean, I think the Achilles or Donegal is equally good. But it's great that we've had somebody. And someone's going to check back on your earlier session. It's great creating new pathways. Listen, everybody, thank you very much for all the words. And Gillian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye.